I'm very, very excited to be here. This is my first time in this city, and so I've had a really good time so far. So this is a strange title, you might be thinking, but I promise it should hopefully make more sense by the time the presentation is over. I sort of want to talk about some research I've been doing into plants, and also just being a programmer and trying to do the same thing in programming, so we'll see how this goes. My name is Suz Hinton. I work in open source hardware, as was mentioned in my intro. I also work in developer relations at Microsoft. And on the weekend, I stream on Twitch, which is like a live streaming website. And instead of streaming gaming, I actually stream development. So if you want to come and watch me code live, I'm not actually doing it this Sunday because I'm traveling, but I usually do it pretty consistently every Sunday morning. And I think it will be, what time will it be for you? I think it's about 1 p.m. this time zone when I start. And you can check me out on Twitter and GitHub and Twitch at noupcat, which is my online handle. So this is a story obviously about plants, but it's also about the idea of offline devices and how IoT, the word internet at the start of that acronym, is so prevalent, but sometimes it's kind of cool to look at other ways to have devices communicate with each other. So I'm going to be talking about a specific offline protocol today. And also a little bit of InfoSec, because when you talk about communication protocols, you also want to talk about how to secure them. And I'm going to ask you to bring a lot of your imagination along with me today as well. So very recently, I moved from New York City to Seattle. And that was a really, really big move for me. Even though I was still staying in the US, I was moving from one coast to the other. And it brought a lot of challenges along the way. I had just been diagnosed with a challenging health issue. I was just not feeling super great. I was feeling afraid of going out and meeting new people in my new town. I was feeling really unsure about where I was sort of going next. And I felt pretty alone. And I was just really struggling to figure out, like, where do I recenter myself? And I thought, well, I've just sort of moved into this apartment. I should do my best to make this apartment as welcoming as possible. And, you know, maybe I need some companionship along with that because I was living alone. And I thought, I could get a dog or a cat, but I travel a lot, and they're kind of a lot of work. And so I ended up deciding on getting a whole bunch of plants instead, and this is where this kind of all started. So this is Charlie. Charlie is a baby pothos, I think, or a devil's ivy, I'm not really sure yet, but he's starting to grow up. This is Tara. Tara is a ZZ plant. This is Violet. I believe Violet is a snake plant. And this is Rufus. He's a spider plant. So I have other plants too. I have succulents and other plants like that, but these are the major ones that kind of require a little bit of work to keep alive. Charlie currently has a little automatic watering bulb right now because he's very fragile. I'm worried about him. And after I moved in, I had some friends over for a housewarming, and I cooked for them and I made them brunch. And the woman on the bottom, just like right here, she's the one that recommended that, because she saw all the plants in my house and because she knew that I cared about them, she recommended this book to me. And the book is called The Hidden Life of Trees. It's been translated into numerous languages, including English, but it was originally written in German. And this book just completely captured my imagination. It talks about how trees communicate in different ways, and their communication capabilities vary based on where they live, what kind of breed or type of tree they are. And I was listening to this as an audiobook every time I took the bus to work, and I just started my day so excited learning about all of these secrets. So I definitely highly recommend that you read this, but this entire talk and this entire project is inspired by this book here. And so what I learned through reading this book and then also researching other papers is that trees, particularly in forests, they communicate with each other. And so a lot of us will have seen the James Cameron movie Avatar, where, you know, the trees are all a network and everything. And some of that is actually based in truth. There are fungi networks where there's lots of mushrooms and other fungi that sort of help other trees connect via roots as well. And they speak to each other through both chemicals and sounds. And the chemicals can be something such as there is a pest who has come to eat the leaves off the plants, and so they will actually release chemicals in the air that will be carried downstream and will warn other plants ahead of time that there's a pest on the way. And I think that's actually really cool. And something that's probably even less understood right now is that plants also make sounds that can either be a disadvantage to them for pests, or it can be an advantage. We just don't quite know much about that yet, and that's sort of where I started exploring this in a technical way as well. And so from the Hidden Life of Trees book, it says, much like human families, tree parents live together with their children, they communicate with them and support them as they grow. But they also share nutrients with those who are sick or struggling, and therefore creating an ecosystem that mitigates the impact of the extremes of heat and cold for the whole group. So the reason why old growth forests have trees that live for for centuries is because they're actually all supporting each other, because they never know when they're going to get sick, and so they want to support everybody. And so I really love that there's this idea of like tree families and tree communities. It's just not something that I really was taught in school. And there's a plant physiologist by the name of Monica Gagliano. She's from the University of Western Australia. I was born in Australia, so I was excited to find out that one of my people is researching this. And she and her team were experimenting on corn plants, and they found that young corn roots generate this clicking noise at around 220 hertz, which is so weird. And they said by suspending the roots in water, they would play a continuous sound that was around 220 hertz, and the roots would turn towards the sound. And they still don't really know why this is, and I think that's kind of cool, but also very mysterious. And so we have identified that plants respond to sound, and they make their own sounds, Gagliano said. The obvious purpose of sound might be for communicating with others. And so this is some research that they're actually starting to do. They've only been able to reproduce this in labs, so they're now trying to figure out how they can use listening devices to do this out in the forest, which I think is really cool. And the scientists also found that around half the sounds that they picked up during a lot of these experiments were associated with these things called cavitations, which are basically like in a drought-stricken area, plants end up building up air bubbles in their vessels that they use to pull the water up, and that's because they can't get enough water, and they're pulling so hard that they're actually pulling up air. And this is actually not great for the plants, and they can only withstand a certain amount of air bubbles before they actually start to die. And so these little air bubble popping sounds are actually above the range of human hearing. I think it's around 20 kilohertz, and I think teenagers can usually hear up to about 18 kilohertz. So I think that's super fascinating too, is that plants are making noises that we can't hear. And the interesting and the most depressing thing that I found out about this is that there are these plants that we call street kids, which are city plants that are planted out in the neighborhood. They're house plants, and they're also plantations. So if all of the plants in a large plantation are all planted at the same time, they also haven't evolved to communicate. There just isn't enough time, and there's not enough fungi networks to develop to create this deep communication that a lot of forests have. And this made me really sad, and it made me think about how when I moved to Seattle and I was so alone and I didn't know who to talk to, and I needed help and I needed support, and I didn't know how to go about that. And I thought of these lonely street kid plants, and I looked at my house plants, and I felt really guilty because, they're in my house, but they're all in these different areas and they can't talk to each other. So I thought, how do I enable my street kid plants to talk to each other? How do we get them communicating again? And obviously, I can't get them to communicate on a real level as plants do, because I don't have the time to develop like fungi networks over centuries. So of course I tried to use technology to explore this idea. And can I use sounds to communicate just like old growth forests do? So I found this audio protocol to help me to do this because I wanted to use sound, and it's called CodeCheff, which is a very fitting name. And so what is chirp? This is sort of what I decided to use to communicate. Well, chirp is a wireless communication technology, and it's specifically designed to exchange data between like devices that are nearby, so devices that can be within earshot. It's really ideal for a lot of different scenarios, for things such as being able to send Wi-Fi passwords to devices so that they can connect to a network very quickly. It's good for sharing contact details. It's good for making peer-to-peer payments, which is a thing that you can actually use the chirp protocol to do. And it's also very useful, at least in my case, in my house, to do offline device telemetry. So devices can talk to each other with the complete absence of any kind of network. And so I'm really into hardware and IoT, but I'm also super into privacy. And I don't really like the idea of having to set up a network in order for my devices to all speak to each other. I think that that kind of opens up a vulnerability to the outside world, and you have to be really careful about it. And also, it's just a lot of troubleshooting when things go wrong. And so I really liked the idea of having these plants that aren't on the internet. They're still communicating in old school ways, the way that they did in the old growth forest. So the actual protocol itself is pretty robust against background noise, which is awesome. So it's being used in factory floors and things like that. It works on older microcontrollers, because all you need is you need a way to be able to plug in a MEMS microphone. That's MEMS, a MEMS microphone, and that can pick up the different frequencies. And you need a speaker as well to be able to play the music. And so you don't necessarily need a device that's like up with the latest technology, because it doesn't take a lot of processing power in order to be able to play audio. It's something we've been doing for a really long time. The data is encryption compatible, so you can use a variety of different encryption methods, including AES, which is what I used, but you can also use, I cannot remember it off the top of my head, but if I remember, I'll interrupt myself. And also, it doesn't rely on network presence, as I said, which I think is really cool. So what does like an actual chirp sound like? Like, what does this audio protocol sound like, given that it's got all of this built-in redundancy and things like that? I'm going to play a sound for you now. And so it kind of sounds like R2-D2 from Star Wars, right? I think it sounds really cool. And so that is the 16 kilohertz frequency, but you can also do 8 kilohertz, which sounds a little lower. And then you can also do ultrasonic, which I'm trying to think, I think that's 20 kilohertz. It might actually be 20 kilohertz. But that's like a new one that I haven't sort of looked into a lot yet. So the chirp protocol has lots of different language SDKs, including Android, iOS, Python. It has JavaScript, and it also has WebAssembly, which is awesome. And so this is the standard JavaScript SDK that you can use in the browser. As you can see, it kind of has a very similar shape to regular SDKs that you would normally use with a library. So you include the library file, and then basically you have an API key. You create a new audio context, which is how it's able to play the actual sound. And then after instantiating like a new chirp connect with your key and the audio context, you create a payload, and the payload is usually just bytes. In some SDKs, you can use a string as well, but usually with the JavaScript one, I just use a byte array. And then you just do connect.send. When you do connect.send, the payload is played out of like your PC speakers or out of the speakers of whatever device that you're using it on. So it's not a lot to get started with. And I liked that there was some JavaScript SDKs for it. This is a little bit more in depth. This is what the WebAssembly library gets you. And so you actually get to subscribe to different events, which is cool. You can have a look at something like onStateChanged, and you can also do onReceived. So this is when you don't just send chirps, you can also receive them from other devices. And I think a really cool feature about this protocol is that if you're sending chirps, the device knows its own chirps. So there's no worry about playing it over the speakers and having the device listen to its own message back. The protocol also handles that, just from me playing with it, which I think is really cool. And so this on-received event won't fire for your own messages, which is awesome. I think that's really, really cool. And so you can just use it with a promise-based interface, and it's pretty much, again, like an SDK that's pretty straightforward to use. And so how do I get these plants talking to each other, though? And the secret is I didn't use JavaScript, at least for the device side, but I did use it for another part, which I'll talk about soon. So we've got Charlie, Tara, Violet, and Rufus, and they need a way to be able to like tell each other whether they're thirsty or not, and details like that, so that they all kind of have a collective sense of community and they know each other's statuses. So I ended up using the following hardware for the project, at least for the plant side. I'm using what's called an MX chip, which is the device that you can see right here. This is actually an open source board, so you can have a look at the schematics online. You can download the PDF and have a look at it all. It's running the Mbed operating system, which I believe is also open source. And I actually have this speaker, this rechargeable speaker that I've plugged into the audio jack at the top. Now, the reason why I chose this board is not just because it's open source, but because it has a built-in microphone that's compatible with being able to like record chirps, and it also has the audio jack built in too. So this is a wonderful prototyping board, especially for this project. And the last device that you see on the right here, that there is a moisture sensor. And so this was the first iteration where I just wanted all of the plants to understand who was thirsty and who wasn't. So again, they have a collective sense of status. And so that's how I put that together. I used some C++ code because there is a C++ SDK for chirp, and it's compatible with this device. I'm using the 16 kilohertz communication protocol to do that. And then I thought, well, I can't just stick the microcontroller like into the plant. That would look really unattractive, and it would not be super waterproof. So I thought, what if like there was like a little tree house in like every pot plant that had the microcontroller in it, and then the tree houses were responsible for communicating. So I thought, okay, I'll try and do this. So I sort of designed these flat pack tree houses. This is an example of, I think, 2 different houses on the same layout, and then I got them all like laser cut, and I wanted to sort of put them together and then put them in the actual in the tree. And so this bit here is sort of the special part, because the hole there that you see, this is actually the back wall on the inside of the house, and I'll just point to it here. And you see this little square? That's like a TV in the house, and the screen on my MX chip microcontroller is what shows the status of all the plants. So this is how I know that it's going to sync up. On that little screen, it's going to give me the vital statistics of like each plant and how thirsty it is at any given time. So you can sort of look through the little windows and see the status at any time. And then the speaker was designed to sit on the roof on a chimney. So this was sort of one of my first prototypes that I put together. I'm still trying to finesse it because it's a little bit big, but this was me just gluing it together and putting it on my table. And the idea is that plants they grow very slowly, they go through life extremely slowly, they're very patient creatures. And so on top of that, I was using like the audible protocol, so I didn't want to annoy myself with lots of sounds. Like I'm quite sensory defensive, and so I don't like sounds a lot of the time. So I wanted to make sure that I could actually not have it just chirping constantly. So the idea is that at 6 a.m. when I normally wake up, all of the tree houses in the plants will all chirp their status, and then they'll all like sync up with each other, and then they'll all kind of know what state they're in. So I can get up out of bed and I can actually check on them as soon as I'm up. And I sort of thought it would be cute. It would be kind of like birds waking me up in the morning, but it's my plants. And then the day goes by, and then at nighttime, they can chirp again at 9:30, which is about half an hour before I go to sleep normally. And I thought this is a nice way for me to know that, okay, they're chirping their status before turning in for the night. I should start thinking about turning in for the night too. This is really weird, but this is how I want to live my life, so I'm just making sure I'm not running out of time. So they'll chirp again at night, and then they'll like go silent again until 6:30 in the morning. So we talked about before how plants sort of exist in families, right? There's children, and then there's the mother tree. And like, you might think of me as the mother tree because I'm nurturing the children plants in my house, but I wanted this idea of also having a mother tree that also knows what's happening and maybe has a few extra capabilities. And so what I want in the future, I haven't actually finished it yet, but I'm working on it, is to have the mother tree be responsible for sending water to the plants if they're thirsty. And then that would kind of live out the prophecy of this, this communication. So I chose a Raspberry Pi for this. I chose the Raspberry Pi 3, I think B+, which is 64-bit, super fast, love working with it. I'm using the chirp protocol on that. I'm using the SDK. I have another speaker plugged in just over here so that it can chirp to the devices. And then I have a microphone that's just a USB microphone that can then listen to the chirps back. So it can communicate with the children as well. So it behaves very similarly. It's just a higher powered device. So the mother tree orchestrates the chirps from the tree houses. So, you know, at 6 a.m., it asks every plant in turn how it's doing, just so they don't talk over the top of each other. It decrypts the chirps, and I'm going to cover that really, really quickly in a second. And then it also runs a server with the events dashboard, which I'll show you as well. But in the future, it's also going to be controlling nutrients and also like water. And so I decided that the payload should just be just very short, or as short as possible. And so the string on the bottom is kind of what it sends. It just converts it into bytes. But it has PL for plants, and then I'm using colons to separate the pieces of data. This is plant 00. So 00 in this case is actually Charlie. And then 457.3 is just the moisture data level. So it's a value from 0 to 1023, because that's how like analog signal measuring works when you're using things like moisture sensors. To encrypt it, I use AES, so I just use like a private key where the mother tree knows the private key, the children know the private key, and so they encrypt that. And you might think, like, what if someone is kind of listening nearby, and they just record the chirp and they play it back, and then they can like fake the data, or they can like replay the data? That's definitely a concern, because this is like an unsecured network, right? It's just stuff that you can literally record in here. And so to get around this, we put a timestamp into the payload, so that's that number that you see at the beginning on the middle line. And then whoever receives chirps can kind of check that timestamp and make sure that it was sent within a very small window of time, so that you can't replay the message later. And then we also use an initialization vector just to be able to create better encryption using that private key. So the IV there just means that I append the initialization vector at the beginning. If you want to know more on this, definitely look up the Node.js crypto built-in library that you can use, and then also just look up symmetric key encryption, because that's what I was using. And so this is a quick video of like the two devices. I was sending a test payload and seeing if the other one received it. And you can see there the sent and the received. It's kind of hard to see. It's pretty much exactly the same packet, which is really cool. And then this is what they display when you look through the window, and on the little TV screen at the back of the house, it kind of shows all of their stats, which I think is really cute. And if it's in yellow, that means that's you. So this is Charlie's microcontroller. And then this is what it looks like in the plant. It's a little too big, so I'm working on that right now. And that there is the unencrypted version. So that's just a very short one, but it's like that PL00 value. That's what I was like going out with. So the mother tree, which you can access at mumtree.local on, on the Raspberry Pi, this is a Node.js app I made called Electric.io, and this is sort of like showing all of their stats too. So I can log in really quickly on my phone or something like that to have a look at it. And so you can actually check out Electric.io. It is open source. and it is written in Node.js. I'm sorry, there's not a lot of Node in this talk, but this, I promise, is in Node.js. So you can check it out, and please contribute to it if you would like to. I work on it a lot on my stream, actually. And so the rest is going to be open source soon. It's just a lot of really bad glue code, some Docker containers, some weird stuff, and I also have like all my API keys in it and everything, so I need to scrub all of that out. But I will open source this project really soon. Future work. I want to make the houses smaller. That's probably going to mean that I'm going to need to design a custom PCB, or a printed circuit board. So instead of using a prototyping board like this, I'm going to end up designing and getting my own board made up so that it's got a smaller profile. I want to have a vacation mode so that it can just automatically water when I'm away, because I do enjoy watering them when I'm in person. You know, it's part of me like nurturing. I'm like the other mother tree. I'm like the auntie tree. I want to be able to control my blinds and my lights with the chirp protocol too, because I think it's really cool. I want to look at the ultrasonic frequencies because I think it's cool when you can't hear it and it's just like silent communication. And I want to make sure that enough stuff stays offline as possible. Like I don't want my Pi connected to my internet router. Like I just want to keep stuff offline because I think it's a really cool thing to do. Resources. Chirp.io is the audio protocol that I was using. The MX chip, that is the URL that will take you to information about the open source hardware board that I was using. And then you can go to github.com/noupcat/electric.io if you wanted to check out the dashboard. The dashboard's really cute. It has lots of really cool features. It even has buttons where you can control the hardware remotely and things like that. I'm really proud of it. I did it to learn Vue. I like Vue.js. Anyway, hopefully you enjoy looking at that. Please check out this book. It's so cool. It's really cool. You will get really excited. I'm pretty sure it's probably translated into Spanish as well. I love it. It's a classic. Do it. So this was a story about plants, offline devices, InfoSec, and imagination. I really hope that this helped you think outside the box of what you can do with Node.js, what you can do with like just communicating, and that it doesn't always have to be about the internet and open source hardware. Hopefully you got excited about that. I wanted to thank you so much for joining me, and have a great conference.